broadcasting live out of a basement in Appleton, Wisconsin. You're tuned into Fox Cities Core on WCZR Code Zero Radio. We're the show that gives you an opportunity to call in and be a part of the show. Our call-in line is 920-358-0795. Core. Well, today we're joined by two talented filmmakers, Jim Baker and Chris Pretti. These guys have put together a fascinating documentary called Green Blah, the history of Green Bay punk rock. It dives into the roots and the evolution of the punk scene in Green Bay, Wisconsin, spotlights bands and venues and different events that took place. We're going to hear all about what it took to get this story told. And so without further ado, let's bring in Jim Baker and Chris Pretti via the telephone. How are you guys doing today?
Good.
Congratulations on the release of this film. It's been over a decade since it came together. And before we get into the documentary, can you tell me a little bit about your backgrounds in the music scene there? And we'll start with Jim.
Probably just like anybody else that grew up listening to punk rock or independent music, I was interested in different things than a lot of the other kids in our junior high or high school, and had art interests and interest in a bunch of different things. And, one of them was music, and wasn't really into what was going on top 40 radio. So just discovering other things that were interesting to me that kind of fit into that art realm, I guess. So that was my introduction. So seeing Devo on Saturday Night Live, like a lot of people say, finding other like-minded individuals that like that type of music, and then getting together with them, trading records, bootlegging cassette tapes, that sort of thing. So that was pretty much my introduction, is meeting a lot of the guys in Green Bay that had similar interests.
You were in quite a few projects back then as well.
Yeah, yep. Along with Chris, we were in a band with Steve Olenichek and Reverend Norb. It was kind of the sidekick to Suburban Mutilation at the time. It was called A Bunch of Morons, hence our production's name. And then, we made fanzines. Chris and I had radio programs, or radio shows on WGBW, on the college radio station in Green Bay. And yeah, just got into the whole thing full force, really.
Chris, can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, sure. I kind of stumbled across it through, punk rock through a friend whose mom worked at WAPL radio. And she would bring home promo records, and somehow we just kind of, we would play whatever looked interesting, and we found the Ramones' Rocket to Russia album, and Clash London Calling, and Black Flag, Jealous Again. That's kind of how I got into it. And again, just meeting sort of like-minded people that I met, Steve Olenichek Queeve, who was in ABM in high school, and he went to Promontory. And then I was going to East, and met Norb and Gary. We went to high school together, and Steve ended up being the drummer in Suburban Mutilation. So that was sort of like where I got the idea, like, he's playing in a band, and maybe I can learn an instrument and play in a band. So I bought a bass, and Jim and Steve and I and Norb had this band, A Bunch of Morons. And like Jim mentioned, that's the name of our production company, because it all ties in together. And then after that, I think I played in, a couple of small bands in Green Bay. And then it wasn't until like the 90s I started playing, in punk bands in Milwaukee, and did a couple down here, and haven't played in a bit, but that's kind of my background in music and the punk scene, I guess.
Do you remember the first time that the two of you met? Do you remember that first meeting?
Well,
kind of in the neighborhood. We grew up a block apart, right? So we would see each other in the neighborhood, but it wasn't really until like high school, like 10th grade.
So Chris had gone to Premontre, which was a Catholic all-boys school. I didn't want to go to an all-boys school, so I went to Green Bay East, although I'm probably more Catholic than Chris is. Seeing as my mom's 100 years old, and she's in the lay order of Carmelite sisters. Anyway, that's just a weird anecdote, Andy, that I wanted to throw in there. But Chris went to Pre-Montre, and then for some reason, you'll have to explain why, Chris, he transferred to East, and we just hit it off, and we had lunch together, and we hung out with some of these other like-minded guys, and just kind of little mini punk rock tribe hanging out at the park by East High School and playing football, and just got to know each other. But Chris is right. We lived a block away from each other. Chris lived right across from Astor Park, kind of a historic neighborhood in Green Bay. And I live just a few houses east of the park. So you would think we've known each other growing up a lot, but we just ran in different circles, and I didn't really know Chris until high school. So pretty weird that it happened that way.
Yeah. And then obviously you had each had a love of music before you met each other. Is that right? What were some of the bands that you bonded over when you met?
It's a good question. So, some of the first stuff that I really got into, and this is through my friend Steve, I was into more like, I don't know, like new wave, like Adam and the Ants a lot, and the Romantics and Pretenders and stuff like that. And then Steve was more into the punk rock stuff. And again, I only had that Ramones album. I had a dubbed cassette of 999 and the Dickies, 2 sides. I got that through another kid in the neighborhood. But then, Steve kind of was a good gateway because we would trade records, right? And I still remember, like, he lent me the first Damned album and first Dead Boys record and Punk and Disorderly, like the UK punk compilation. So I don't know. I think that was kind of like the catalyst, probably for like Jim and I. I remember like we bought the first Descendants album kind of early on, and Social Distortion, things like that.
Well, then, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Andy. I would say Chris had his inclination was more towards listening to the British punk rock and really getting into some of the oi bands and some of the others. Correct me if I'm wrong, Chris. And I like that stuff as well, but I really like the Southern California, the Washington, D.C. stuff, because by the time we were getting into that, hardcore had happened. So I really liked a lot of the Boston bands, a lot of the Washington, D.C. bands, L.A. bands, San Francisco bands. So we listened to a lot of different stuff, but just in general, we shared that love. So a lot of those records were shared between us.
And not to get too far ahead, but you mentioned the hardcore scene coming up. Was that around the time of, was No Response coming up right at the beginning of the rise of the hardcore scene, or were they kind of after the wave already started toppling?
Well, No Response, Art Thieves, and Suburban Mutilation, that was Green Bay's kind of first hardcore hit, so those guys were doing that in probably 81, 82. But, a little bit, Green Bay gets everything a little bit later, right? So back then, a couple of years later, from DOA and the Washington, D.C. scene and the L.A. scene, Green Bay was a lot of that stuff was starting to seep into Green Bay, and that's when Jim Runge, Norb Rosick, Kirk Wall, all those guys who are a year ahead of us in school. So, and some of them a couple years ahead. So that's kind of how that happened. But yeah, they were the first bands, There was really at the beginning of it, it was just a small group of those guys like Jim Runge and Reverend Norb and Kirk Wall and a bunch of other guys. But they, in the phase, they were kind of the first people doing that.
Well, let's talk about the music years went by, and did you and Chris stay in touch this whole period from way back when to all the way starting with the documentary work?
Yeah. Yep. We stayed friends the whole time. It's like there's camaraderie from this. Andy was, it's kind of in our DNA now. So we all stayed in touch to some degree, even though we got older, moved away. Some people moved away, got jobs, had children. Chris doesn't have children. He has dogs, which are more like kids to him than children would be.
Well, who came up with the idea to start the documentary? I mean, were you guys throwing around ideas? Was there something that spawned this idea between you guys?
Well,
Yeah, it was kind of a. So I don't know, like it was 2008. That's sort of where we formed the idea. And Jim had called me at one point and said, "Hey, I'm thinking of doing this documentary on Green Bay." And I had coincidentally came across this character, this guy, Brad Warner. He played in a hardcore band from Ohio back in the early 80s called Zero Defects. And somehow I found he did like this book on Buddhism. It was called Hardcore Zen. And I read the book, and it's, you know, a really good tie-in with, it's not like, I don't know, he's actually a Buddhist monk, and he lived in Japan for a while, and he worked with the people that did Ultraman, so he's kind of like a pop culture type guy in some ways. But anyway, I went to see him in Minneapolis, and we ended up doing like record shopping and stuff afterwards and went to dinner. And just a pretty interesting guy, and there's common backgrounds, right? Because hardcore scene in Ohio and hardcore scene in Green Bay, same time period. And he was in Milwaukee the following year, and he handed me a DVD. He did a documentary about the punk scene in and around Cleveland. It was called Cleveland Screaming, and he did this reunion show and filmed it and did interviews and kind of put it together himself pretty quickly. And so I had mentioned that to Jim when we were talking about this. We got together at his skateboard shop in Oshkosh, and we kind of just, you know, came up with a plan. And we did a reunion show, but I think it was just we spent so much effort on that we didn't film it or anything. And then that's kind of like, that was sort of how it formulated in our minds. And then, you know, we put it into motion at the very end of 2012. We interviewed Jim Runge when he was back for Christmas. And then it just, you know, snowballed from there.
So Jim was like the first piece of the documentary that was shot, is what you're saying.
Yeah. I mean, really, I was laying on the couch, had a really bad cold. And it was like December, and I was just watching TV, and there's a camera store down here in Milwaukee called Arts Camera Plus. And they had an ad on TV for, like, you know, their Christmas sale. And I'm like, well, Runge's going to be here. I should just go buy a camera. And I called Jim and said, you know, let's interview you when you're back. And it just sort of fell together because it was, we had a lot of life situations come up between the reunion show and when we started, you know, doing interviews. That just kind of got in the way of things. A lot of stuff with parents and significant others and all that. So, I bought the camera, we got a mic, rented a mic, picked up some lighting at like Bed Bath & Beyond or something, and interviewed Jim Runge at a Holiday Inn Express in Alloway.
I think at the time he was he was a tour manager for the Black Keys, wasn't he?
Mm-hmm. It was either right before that or at the same time, but yeah, it was in that sort of time frame.
At that point, knowing what you know now, did you have any idea when you look back at yourself 12 years ago or whenever that was? Do you think you had any idea what you were getting into once you did that first interview?
Well, it was a couple hours long. That's what I remember. And then we did these weird kind of like skits at the end. So every time we interviewed somebody, we'd have, like, for Jim, we had him get in a bathtub, and then we asked him like some just silly personal questions based on Jim's personality. You know, Jim was quite a character back then, but then he had this kind of handlebar-y mustache and kind of Kit Carson look to him. So we asked him just silly questions about that and stuff. But yeah, it was a long interview, and we just knew it's going to be a pretty long endeavor because, you know, Chris had to drive up from Milwaukee, he lives in Cudahy. So we had to meet Jim, we had to do that, and then we had to capture all the film and Yeah, I mean, we knew it was going to be a project. Did we know it was going to be, a decade worth of work and perseverance? No. But we kind of knew pretty early on when it started splitting in, like, okay, like, this is what we want to do. And we just didn't want to capture our era. We really wanted to go back to where did this really begin. So that made it a lot longer than if we would have just did like the hardcore era or the time where we came in. But we wanted to be all inclusive because to us that's really an important thing of how everything transpired. So
I imagine too, once you talked to one person, they suggested somebody else, and you were probably quickly like interviewing way more people than you originally thought.
yeah, go ahead, Chris. Why don't you, if you don't mind, why don't you tell them about our meeting with Jim and Norb at
Yeah. So yeah, we met with Norb Rosick, Reverend Norb from Boris and all that. One night we just we had dinner at Hagermeister Park, and we just sat down and said, "Hey, Norb, can you scribble 25 names down for us, like the top 25 people we need to talk to?" And he did that, and we still have that page somewhere. And that was really like, okay, let's figure out a way to knock out these interviews and whatever. But you're right, like you said. You talk to one person, then they're like, "Oh, you got to talk to this guy," and it really kind of went that direction. I mean, there were people that probably Norb didn't even think of, that we managed to track down and interview, like some of the early DJs on WGBW, like Rick Panic and Leonard Reedon. The Just Punks guys, Ernie Corpus and Randy Cisco. I mean, we really did dig down into the history, and it spans a pretty good chunk of time, because I would say like maybe 77, 78 is kind of the beginning, when we're talking about some of the record stores and the radio station and Just Punks. But then, we carry that forward throughout the 80s and then into like up until like the mid 90s. So, yeah, it's pretty comprehensive, and it's told, linear, on a straight line, linear, from beginning, on the timeline. So anyway, yeah, that's kind of how we got that started.
So getting all those interviews sounds daunting, and I don't know how many people you interviewed, but what sounds even more stressful to me is editing it down to who you're going to put in the documentary and who you're going to have to cut out. Was there a lot of debate between you and Jim as far as who to keep in or what to take out?
I'll let Jim answer that one.
Oh my God. Well, all right. So I'm really sentimental, and this is really important to me. And obviously that's why we did this. We wanted to capture it for everybody, and before too many people get too old or memories are lost. You mentioned something, Andy, about somebody that you had on the show that, in the past that didn't remember some of the stuff, because it's hard because there's so many details in what's going on. And then we lost some friends along the way. So it's really important to me to put in everybody we interviewed, first of all, because there's a reason why we interviewed them. And then to give you an answer, we interviewed around 90 people. So then if you multiply that for footage-wise by like an hour and a half or so for each interview, it's pretty daunting amount of footage to really go through. But because I'm sentimental, I really wanted to have in some of the things that happened along the way that were really good stories that were tied into some of the people that were involved in this, but it had to still meet the criteria of what our scope was, like what we were trying to get out of this. What was this story of Green Blah? Like why was it called that, and where did it start from, and where did it go to? So that's why I was telling you before we went on air. We do have a bunch of chapters, or several chapters, that have already been edited, with pictures and with sound and everything, just like it would have been one chapter in the film, but we had to remove them. And, those are kind of some real special ones. So I think the bonus is going to be pretty good, because those are some really good stories and some really funny, wacky stuff. Because Green Bay, to be honest, to the people that didn't grow up in Green Bay, it was pretty funny. There was a lot of, there was a lot of inside jokes and funny stuff that went on in Green Bay that you can't really tell in a film like that because it's just anecdotal, like one-off type things. But there's some interesting stuff that will come out. So, yeah, I mean, you're right. Like we had, all these guys are our friends except some of the earlier guys that we didn't know. We know everybody that we interviewed almost. So it was really hard not to put everybody in the film and that. But the good thing is they will be in the bonus and be part of that. So
You're interviewing so many people. There must be like different recollections of some of the stories, some of the same events that I remember differently. Did you run into, going through some of these interviews and hearing somebody say this happened like this, and then somebody else explains the same event totally different? How did you make the decision to go with, one version of the story?
Chris?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's definitely, people have different recollections of things. I think we just really went with who said it the best. I mean, because, for some of the events, we were there personally, and others we might not have been. But, yeah, you just really want to it always kind of comes down to who said it best, really. And unfortunately, that's kind of what happened with, like we did interview 90 plus people, and some are like group settings, like the Tyrants, there's, 3 people on the couch, and Depo Provera and Norben Gary from SUM, that kind of stuff. But, individually there were, over 90, and, I think we fit most in. There really were only a handful that didn't make it. And it kind of came down to like who says it best. And, and some things may not have even, like topics might not have even made it in. So that, could eliminate somebody there. And, we feel bad, because it would be nice to include everyone, but that's just kind of, even we all made sacrifices, and even, like maybe 6 to 8 weeks out from when we showed the film, we still had to cut like, almost a half hour out. And there were things that we both really loved that wanted to go in, and we had some really, some cool like animations that Norb did for us that didn't make it in, and, it ends up on the cutting room floor, and it's sad, but I feel that we can, still use those in other ways, either on like the bonus disc and kind of, how much space we have there. That's, still kind of a question mark, but even outside of that, I think we could probably, then utilize like YouTube or something like that to throw out, stuff later on.
So the interviews are one thing, and that's overwhelming, but also as far as getting the old flyers, getting pictures of the venues, was it harder to get some of the earlier? I noticed there's less video in the late 70s stuff. How was it to tell the story? How did you get the pieces to tell the story?
Yeah, so we just really hit up like, everybody we knew, and we even had it in like the Press Gazette. Kendra had put out a thing for us, like if anybody, that's when we were looking for, photos overall, but specifically like some landmarks in Green Bay, like old photos of Lambeau Field and things of that nature, because we wanted to show Lambeau the way it was versus, now it's, this huge complex. But yeah, you just tried to hit up everyone you can think of. Hey, do you have any photos? And it's sometimes like pulling teeth, to get people. We had stuff that came in literally like weeks before, we showed it in November. We had a friend of ours who had 80 photos on negatives that he ended up getting made. He got the images from him, and he's like, oh, these are kind of okay. And like those 80 photos are great. They were mostly from Northside bowling lanes, but then others from like the Labor Hall in Oshkosh, and were from a specific kind of time frame. I would say like 83. I think they're all like 83, and they're black and white for the most part, and they were some really great shots. So yeah, it's just, it's time consuming, and it's hitting people up repeatedly sometimes like, hey, give me those photos.
Was there anything that somebody sent in that just blew you guys away? Something you didn't know existed, and you saw it and it just blew your mind?
Well, I would say like those 80 photos that you just got in. We had photos of Loud Fast Rules in there that we talk about them in the film because they were on tour with Husker Du, and that was 83 in Oshkosh. And Loud Fast Rules later became Soul Asylum. And we had a bunch of Soul Asylum photos, mostly from I think a show at UWGB. But those Loud Fast Rules photos, I think there was 4 or 5, and we didn't have those before. And it just, yeah, I mean, that was just like, wow, neat because. And like the State, that was a band from Michigan. They played at Northside. We had 2 photos from that one, and but then there's ones that we never captured. Articles of Faith played at Northside. There's 0 photos. Would have been nice to find those, but yeah, I mean, anytime, yeah, there are a lot of images that were just like, wow, outstanding, really good photos.
And you guys got interviews with Dave Perner from Soul Asylum. You've got some of the guys from The Descendants in there. Ian, I always say his last name wrong. Is it Mackay? Different people in there. How did you land those interviews?
Well, I think a big part of that is a lot of those guys we're friends with just from touring and, knowing those people. And Peggy Herlash was instrumental in getting us in contact with Dave. And some of these stuff happened towards the end. And, there are younger people that were involved. Ned Dorff from Green Bay that was in bands and went to a lot of the cafe shows. He had a connection because they went to, his family took an East Coast tour. Like him and his wife and 3 kids went to Discord House and, ended up talking to some of these guys. So that was a big part of it. But there's a lot of connections that run through Green Bay because when these bands were playing in Green Bay, they weren't huge. They weren't huge shows at first, so that we knew a lot of those guys, and some of those connections are still there.
It was really cool to see people like Dave Perner in there. It just kind of tying it together that this scene in Green Bay was also had national components to it. When you were getting these interviews and putting those together, was there any feeling of trying not to go too heavy on the major label type people to keep it more local?
Are you asking us why we don't have Dave Grohl in?
He pops up in everything. I was just waiting for all of a sudden him to be sitting there talking about something.
Yeah. So, the reality is Dave Grohl toured with Scream, and, we set them up at Kutzkus Hall several times, and they also played at a roller rink, and that's another whole part of the, that could have been in the film that there were a lot of punk rock shows at weird venues like roller rinks. And when Kutzkus wasn't available, we had to do this big show that we called Monsters of Punk, and Kurt Christensen and I set it up, and we had to get whatever venue you could. And that was the one that was available. It was this place called Wheels in Motion in Howard. It was like less than a mile from Kutzkus Hall. And then we had Dave Grohl was drumming for Scream when they played there, and Agent Orange played, and just some cool things. We called it Monsters of Punk because there was that whole tour Monsters of Rock, and we just thought that was ridiculous. So that's kind of how that happened. But there's still those lot of connections because those guys would tour in vans and show up in Green Bay, and there was, we talk about it in the film. There's no line between the band and the guy setting it up, or the girls setting it up, and the guy making the fanzine, or any of that stuff. It was a big collective get together and let's have some fun and make some cool stuff happen.
I'm glad you brought up the fanzines because you used to do a fanzine, and it's in the documentary, the one that Norb did. Can you tell people watching that might not know what a zine is, what it is, and what it meant back in the pre-internet days?
Sure. So, Norb kind of led the charge with that. Obviously, he had a fanzine called Sick Teen. We talk about it, quite a bit in the film. And there were national magazines like Cream that were big, like big independent music magazines. But to get connections and to get people involved in some of these things, you really had to put something together. So you just you photocopied some pictures, and you went to a local print shop and put together this kind of tiny little magazine that was just, you stapled it together and you handed it out at high schools or had it at record stores. And like I said, 16 was the big impetus for a lot of us to make fanzines. And then we each kind of went our own way and did them a little different than Norb did. But, obviously he had an influence on all that stuff. So it was a small photocopied magazine that had band interviews, it had record reviews, it had live show reviews, and then a bunch of wacky, silly stuff that teenagers would like, I guess.
And how would it be distributed? How would you get it out there?
So Norb, he would send like a lot of copies off to like other fanzines. So that kind of spread the word. Because there was like a pretty interesting like way that hardcore scenes were connected throughout the US, and mostly like a lot of it was through fanzines. And that's how you would get somebody's name and maybe a phone number or an address. But I sat in geometry class next to Suburban Mutilation's drummer, their first drummer, Perry, because we were alphabetical. And Perry sat next to me, and he saw I had you'd have book covers on your books in high school, and I would draw band logos on, and he saw that I had stuff that, was kind of similar in nature. So like one day he just handed me this copy of 16, and he's like, "Hey, you should check this out." And I was like, wow, this kid in our high school made this. I mean, it was pretty unusual. I mean, that was like, it was kind of mind blowing, really. And, but then he would have them at like the record stores. Like if you went to Freedom Records, downtown Green Bay, they would have like a pile of them, like a little stack by the cash register, or, Pipe Dreams, that kind of thing. So you pick them up there. And then there were a couple bigger fanzines that were known like, nationally and internationally. 16 was actually known internationally, actually. But there was like Flipside in LA and Maximum Rock and Roll in San Francisco. And both of those were pretty good resources for, finding out what was going on. Those magazines were pretty big, like Ripper fanzine from San Francisco. But Max Rock and Roll was, big time. You could buy that at a store, in Green Bay, or you could get it sent to you in the mail, that kind of thing. But it was a really good connection point. It was like I always say like 16 kind of was like a beacon for Wisconsin, because, Norb mentions that like through the fanzine, then he got to meet, like the imports from Brilliant and No from Mishicot and Malignants from Sturgeon Bay. So it, you just realize that there were other people that were into that same sort of thing. And, you didn't have internet or Facebook or anything. So that was sort of like the beacon that drew you in.
Yeah.
Well, and the other thing is we'd get a lot of records for free because we'd put interviews, or you'd send these off to all these record labels, and they were really interested in putting, Tang Records would send you a box of like 6 records to review in your fanzine. And, there was a handful of them in the beginning, Andy, like in the hardcore era. There was, like 6 or 7 of us that did fanzines, and some people did one issue. Like I kept mine going for years. Obviously 16 lasted for years as well. But then you trade for other fanzines and you get flyers, and it was just interesting. There was fanzines we'd get from Alaska and Hawaii, and just, it was really kind of a uniting thing for everybody to know what was going on in each little scene. Our fanzine told what was going on in Green Bay scene, and you get a San Francisco one, like Chris said, Ripper fanzine was one of my favorites, and it's kind of skateboard influenced, and it was from San Jose. So that told us about a lot of the San Francisco bands, like bands that you would never have heard of before, like Condemned to Death or Touch Me Hooker, really kind of some interesting bands that were out there that you had no idea. That, then you knew that they had a 7-inch, and then you might order it. So that really connected us all in a lot of ways throughout the country.
It's interesting because back in those days, you might see a name in a zine, and your band name had to be very unique, because now you can pull up a band on Spotify, hear it instantly. Back then, you needed to draw attention to your name or your image, and then you had to do some footwork to actually hear that music and find the right record store or the right outlet for it. We had a question here from Bob Minter. He asks, was the learning curve difficult putting together a documentary, or did either of you have prior experience to lean on?
Bob, that's funny, Bob. Our answer is going to be funny, I guess, not the question. That's a great question. So neither one of us have any background in film, but it's an interest because just like anything else, it's art, right? And there's some professionals that we talk to, and they're like, well, how are you going to pull off doing this without knowing anything? And I'm like, well, that's how you started a band or you made a fanzine. You got to get your feet wet somewhere. So to answer that question, Bob, we have no background in it. We have no skill level at all. And Chris is about to tell you what our equipment consisted of.
Yeah, so like I think we probably still have the drawing that our friend John Pata, he is friends with us and, helped us with editing throughout the course of this and really helped tide things up at the end. But, he kind of drew up like, okay, here's how you want the person to be on screen. And you have to think of it like in thirds, and you kind of want the person's face in 1/3 and then, background or whatever in the other 2/3. And, it all sounds good on paper, right? But when you actually get there and set things up, I mean, it really was a learning process. And I don't even know if we fully learned everything, to tell you the truth, because I think like we did really well with backgrounds and things. Like the sound at times was a bit of a challenge, and sometimes lighting would be really difficult to work with. And that's why when you see some of the interviews we did outside, and you run the risk then of getting like, ambient noise, birds and cicadas and cars. But we did that kind of because it was the better lighting, and we didn't have to stress out about, trying to get it dialed in a room where, maybe lighting is not the best. And yeah, so it really was a DIY sort of thing. I think it turned out pretty well, like image-wise, and we really, varied things up. I've watched other punk documentaries where I'm like, man, that's like a pretty weird background, like a purple curtain. Or there's a Boston documentary, and they're like in this room where I don't know exactly what it is, but there's glass, like floor to ceiling glass windows, and it's on a busy street in Boston, and there's all these people walking by. I'm like, wow, I wouldn't have done that. So at least I think we did, fairly well at that. I think it's kind of interesting because there are many different backgrounds, and that's in part too because we interviewed 90 people. So, I mean, there was a lot of variation.
Just one more thing about that. So we wanted it to be organic too, right? We didn't want to have that like super film background to do this, because the whole subject matter was about starting something and doing it yourself. And the whole project and the whole theme of this film is, do it yourself and make things happen. And that's kind of how we wanted it to be. But when it comes to equipment, Andy, we had one little camera, a tripod that Chris got later, and then we had like a microphone stand with no microphone on it, and then we clipped the light on it, and that was our lighting. I mean, if we really did this, like, not even purposely like that. It's just like, we didn't know. That's what we did, and it worked, and we liked it, and wanted to keep it as simple as possible. So that's a great question, Bob. I hope we gave you an answer that was good. The other thing we haven't mentioned, and the most important thing, is Chris and I took a long time to pick the editors, and I think we just knocked it out of the park. I mean, I really, really think that the editors are as important as Chris and I, if not even more important, because they're the ones that, took what we had and got together with us and listened to us and really were, modeled what we needed to do in a lot of ways. And that's John Pata in the beginning. And then John had to part ways and move on to bigger and better things because he had some stuff going that was out of state and he couldn't do it. So then we Chris got a hold of 3 guys in Milwaukee that took it on, and Chris, you can name those guys. And then afterwards, Eric Carter kind of took the realm, and he lives in the Astor Park neighborhood. He lives a block and a half from my house, and he just did fantastic work. And he's done a lot of different stuff in Green Bay. I was hoping actually to bring him with or John with today, but neither one of them could make it. But, picking editors and people to work with us really taught us a lot and really was beneficial, and we can't thank those guys enough.
Well, it's edited really well. And then there's a frame at the end of the movie where you guys list what equipment you used. I think you were alluding to Chris to kind of talk about some of that prior, but it's you've got the cost of everything laid out, and it's in equipment. It's under $1,000 just for the equipment. I'm sure a lot more than that obviously goes into a film, but it's amazing that you guys did everything in this video with that equipment, and I think that is so cool. You mentioned Norb was did some animations that were cut, but there's also some cool effects with photos, old photos, to make them pop from the picture. There's an interesting part that, just the history. I don't want to give too much of the movie away, but there's a great scene with some animations with Time Bomb Tom and Reverend Norb at a radio station. Kind of the whole night, the whole station is self-destructing, and those guys, they're going down with the ship. But the animations really help bring some of the audio to life, and it was just so cool. I recommend people check this movie out if they can. You've got some showings, and I don't want to jump too far ahead, but you've got next week. You want to talk a little bit about where people are there still tickets available for that?
Sure. So there's another premiere showing of the film on December 21st, Saturday, December 21st, at 2:00 is the one that's still available with some tickets. So if people are interested, it's the last time in the immediate future that we're going to be showing the film in Green Bay. So if you'd like to go, please grab tickets. It's at the Tarleton Theater, historic Tarleton Theater in downtown Green Bay. And it's thetarleton.com where you can go to. And they were really great partners with us the first, when we did the first showings of it in November, and then we set one up for this December 21st at 5:00, and that showing sold out. So we added this matinee. So,
well, there's something after it called the 2024 Green Bay Punk Christmas Party, and that's free. That part is free, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that part's free. Yeah, that's something that we've had going for, I don't know, over 10 years or so. I think it was like Jim Runge, myself, some others started it. And we do that every year, and we typically had it at like Titletown Brewery for the most part. And it's really just myself, Carl Kersling, and Steve Stengel. We spin records. We bring our, some good records from our collections, and we spin records and, just sit around and have some drinks and whatever with friends, whoever can make it. So it's always open to anybody who wants to join. As feel free to come down. So we decided that we showed the film at the beginning of November, and some people might come back for the holidays, like I said, for this punk rock Christmas party that we do. And so we thought, well, let's show it again, and then we'll just do it at the Tarleton this year. The punk Christmas record spin thing. So we just put it in combination with it. So yeah, it'll be a fun night. I've just got some new records in the mail the other day that I'm going to play on Saturday night.
Paul Schroeder was also involved in pretty big in this. Paul from Boris the Sprinkler.
Yep.
So Paul Schroeder, Carl Kersling, he was in a band many moons ago called Milton and the Pop-Tarts. And then Steve Stengel's been around a long time in the Green Bay punk rock scene, and he's really, really a big proponent of live music and goes to almost everything that he can, and he works in the Stagehands Union. So with them in combination with Chris, it's always a fun time, and you can request songs and records. And yeah, we would, like Chris said, we would encourage anybody to come that would likes that kind of music. Come check it out. It's free. And
we've got a question here. It's from Colin Crowley. He says, "Hey Baker, even though things are very different culturally and with regards to technology now than they were back in the 80s, What are some of the bigger lessons that younger generations can take away from what you guys did back then? And it goes on further than this thing will show. Bigger lessons in younger generations can take away from what you guys did back then. What are the bigger themes beyond punk music that you hope people take away from this film? What a great question.
First of all, Mr. Crowley, we haven't seen each other in a long time, and I really, really miss you and love you and hope you're doing awesome with your family. Colin was living overseas in Africa for a long time. Do you know Colin?
No.
Oh, you'd love him. He's great. I mean, it goes without saying, it's just common knowledge now in independent music and punk rock to say, do it yourself, right? But if you have an idea and you want to do it, do it. And don't worry about the repercussions or don't even think about it too much. Just kind of go with the flow and make stuff happen. I mean, anybody that is involved in playing in a band, it's not easy to get together and make a band with 3 or 4 different people with different mindsets, but that's what makes it awesome. It's art, and when it works great. And if it doesn't work, then you start something else out. And going back to Dave Grohl, I mean, Dave Grohl's Dave Grohl, right? He's pretty godhead in music to some degree, and people may like him or not like him, but he's got some really interesting ways of doing things. And when he did the South by Southwest keynote speech that he did, kind of explained a lot of that, like, make stuff happen. It's going to suck at first, but just do it. And I guess that would be my answer, Colin. Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it really is. I think the theme is one, just looking at, right, things have changed a lot from the 70s to now, but, it really still comes down to, if you think that the place where you live is boring, then it's on you to make things happen, right? And there's ebbs and flows in all this. When the punk scene started in Green Bay, and there may have been 50 people at a show, and when we get into like the latter stages of Kutzkas, there was 700 people at a show. But you can still do things on any sort of level, any scale that you need. Like the last band that I played in, we were out in Milwaukee. We were called Let's Play God, and Andy Junk was our bass player, and he's in the film at the end because he was pretty prominent in like the concert cafe scene. And when all that sort of fell out, he moved to Milwaukee, and they had a punk house down here where bands were playing in the basement. And the band that I was in with him, Ryan Portenga and this other guy, Rob, I mean, we played basement shows. We played the Eagles Club in Green Bay before that went down. We played Quarters Rock Palace in Milwaukee, which is one of the smallest places you can play. So, you just kind of do what you need to do, right? And, Tom Smith has shows at the record shop in Green Bay at UFO Museum. So, there's still room to have these small shows, to have your band that, practices in your parents' basement or garage, and get out and do it and send your demo tape to local radio. Down here in Milwaukee, we've got WMSE radio, and it's still like a college station. It's still publicly owned, but, send your demo tape in there, or demo CD, or whatever you have these days. Cassettes are big these days, I think, again. So
I hear that. I don't understand that, but
no, it's the worst format ever, honestly, because it's like the tape gets stuck in the tape player in your car.
It's punk rock.
So to gap the younger generations to the history, what I love about this film, another thing I love about this film, is that it lays it out. It makes it really easy for somebody to pop it in, see the history, and the way it's edited. It hits you really fast. People I didn't know about, like Brett Starr. I didn't know that Bart Starr's son was in a band. I didn't know the whole history with him. There's a segment in there about that, but it made me wanting to learn more. And I think that a nice thing about this documentary, number one, it pulls together all these pictures, the video clips, the band names. It's a document. It's like almost like a book on the shelf now that people can reference. What was the feedback like after the premiere? And can you tell me a little bit about the premiere? Were you guys at all feeling nervous? Because this is 12 years in the making, and all of a sudden the night is here, the big night. Can you walk me through it?
Well, I can say that I was a bit nervous it was mainly just I was concerned about like audio video problems, glitches that would pop up. Because I had seen a film in Milwaukee where they kind of ran into a problem where like the audio video went out of sync, and we did a dry run prior to, and we had to tweak some things. So, that was just the main fear. I think like, and I'm not trying to speak for Jim, but I think like on its own, like the film itself, I think I wasn't worried about content or people not liking it, I guess. I mean, sort of. I mean, you're not really sure what the audience reaction is going to be, but so yeah, nerves for me were there. And then, you're just kind of hoping that, you just really want that audience reaction and that feedback to see, right, you spent 11 years on this. Are people going to like it? So yeah, a lot of nerves. And then plus we had the live shows afterwards. So there was, Jim did most of the work on that. And, it's, you got to have a PA set up, and you've got to get bands on stage timely. And, a lot of these bands hadn't played in a number of years. So, are they going to be able to pull it off? And I have to say that it went off without a hitch. I mean, everything was pretty smooth.
Jim,
I'll send it over to Jim.
When you're trying to get the bands together, Jim, was it everybody pretty much agreed to play? Some of these bands hadn't played for like 30 years, right? Maybe
yeah,
longer?
some hadn't played for almost 40 years. It was really
Some were
hard
practicing that afternoon.
Well, and the reality is they all got back together and practiced 1 or 2 times. It wasn't like anybody had, hey, let's practice for 3 months and do that. I mean, are you familiar with Tim Beekler? Mm-hmm. Tim jumped in and played in a band with Kirk Wall and myself. We were in a band called Rosary. And Kirk lives in Madison. He plays in the band The German Art Students. I don't know if you know them.
I know them. Love them.
Yeah. So Kirk's, you probably saw Kirk in the film. I'm like, oh, yeah, he came from that Green Bay scene. But Tim had never played with us, showed up, and said he had a great time, and he was super cool about doing it. And we practiced for like an hour, and that's all we practiced. But you pull it off. It's, it's music, and it's a passion, and you make it happen. I think I had COVID during that whole weekend. I had a migraine the whole entire time. I'm not trying to say, oh, poor me. But we had to haul music equipment that night over to practice above the depot. We're really cool about letting us have that space to have some of the bands practice. So I was in a band called Withdraw that practiced there. No Response with Jim Runge practiced there. And some of the components of those bands are very similar. So some of the same players. And we had Dave Poison come up from Austin, Texas. We had Tim Byers. He didn't play in a band, but his brother Rob Byers came back from Colorado, and they just flew in that day, practiced, and then played. And matter of fact, the Art Thieves were practicing in one of the back rooms at the Tarleton right up until the show. And we're like, hey, do you guys want to go on? They're like, no, we're going to run through stuff one more time. And they did great. And it was great. So a lot of to answer your question more specifically, Andy, it wasn't easy to get these guys back together because nobody knew if they could do it, or like, oh, I don't know if I can get a hold of this guy and if it'll happen. But the love of music and the camaraderie just really brought a lot of people back together. And then when you do get back together and you remember how fun that stuff really was and how, important it was to each one of our lives, and then to do it with some friends, and it was super fun to do it when you were 17, but to get back together when you're 58 or 60 and do it, it's pretty cool.
Were there any bands that got back together permanently after the show?
Well, that's only a month. That's only a month ago.
Yeah.
But
not this time.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry, Chris.
Oh yeah, no. After we had our reunion show, I wouldn't say it was a permanent, and that was back in 2008. But we had some bands that did kind of keep it going for a while after that, and we actually had some people that formed new bands, but were from that era. So like Jeff DeGooey and from Moral Disgust and Pat Wanish from Depo Provera, they had a band running for a while, Scrap Heap Kings. They were outstanding, like a really good band. But, Jeff DeGooey he's never stopped playing music. He's in a current band, and they played at the film premiere. But then, we had other guys we interviewed, like Carm Kerwell and Jeff Togner from The Mess. They were from Appleton, and they've got a band, the Royal Blue. And after we interviewed them, they kind of had this, I don't know, they just really felt like they needed to play music again, and they got that going, and they played last weekend. So, yeah, I mean, there definitely is, kind of like some activity that came out of the film and interviews and reunion shows.
There's a part in the film where Andy Junk is talking about Cuscus Hall, and that was his first punk show up in Green Bay. And I was talking to Jim prior to the show. That was also, I could relate to it because that was my first punk show up there as well. And did you guys try to reach out to any of the bands that were playing that night about the floor and what they thought about it? See if they have any remorse for, wrecking that venue. And both of you were there that night?
I was not, no.
So I was a promoter of that show, a co-promoter with Rich Winker and Kurt Christensen. And I was still promoting shows at that time. And it was, that was obviously like right before the Concert Cafe and some of the VFW, Eagles Club shows that happened. And Tom Smith has been doing shows pretty much since he got into the punk scene in 1986. Tom kind of got introduced to it and had a radio show, and his show really changed a lot and really, I guess I'm kind of losing track here, Andy.
As far as reaching out to like face to face.
Oh yeah. So we had, over the years, we had talked to them, and they'll always make comments. Like they played at the Warped Tour one year and said, "Hey, any of you fools from Green Bay or something?" And they just kind of downplayed it. And we didn't reach out to them. Maybe we should have, in retrospect. But I just think we had enough commentary and enough stuff there to really explain that whole situation. So, that, Cuscus Hall was a big part of our lives because that was the longest running venue at that time. And it really was a great place where you could go, and you weren't going to hurt that old place too much besides ruining the floor, I guess. But, and Bob just let us go, we were there early, we were there late. And I say it in the film, he couldn't have been any kinder to us. He was just a wonderful old guy, just very fortunate to have the people that we did be part of all this.
It's a good piece in there to show that there was somebody really far removed generationally from the scene, and you've got a news clip in there of the news talking about Cuscus, and then it ends with maybe they'll be looked back on as the good old days, probably not, or something like that. But then you've got somebody like Mr. Cuscus who's totally like embraced you guys and gave the local scene. And do you ever think about like the current scene and some things that you don't like that maybe it's going to end up being kind of like punk was back in the Green Bay days?
Can you explain that question?
So like back in the movie, the news is almost downplaying punk, like it's this kids thing, whatever. Is there like a style of music now that you don't really understand or you don't like, that you might think, well, maybe this is kind of like punk was to the older generation, and maybe this is going to be kind of the future punk, 30 years down the road? And then you're going to be kind of like looked at as one of those old people sitting in the bar that didn't understand it.
Chris, do you have an answer to that?
No, I guess sort of. I mean, I know like in Milwaukee, and I know even in like Green Bay, because we did a radio interview with Mino and the Mayor, and there was like some pretty small independent like hip hop type artists there. And I know my wife had listened to the interview they were on prior to us, and they kind of had the same kind of situation, right? It was very DIY and it was very underground, and it's, trying to find a place, where you can have your music, a venue and so forth. And same kind of struggles, and I'm not involved in that at all. I mean, I kind of am aware of it, but it's not really my thing. But I do listen to some of that stuff here and there. So, I mean,
He's
but
super into it. He's super into it.
but I mean, obviously, like, there's mainstream hip hop stuff that's off the charts. I mean, there's no shortage of that. But I mean, it's nice to hear that there are like local kids that are doing it that you don't get airplay and you're just doing it because that's what you need to do, right? It's the same kind of thing as punk, really. I mean, as far as like outside of that, I mean, I know there are like more like indie pop stuff, and it's not really like I wouldn't say it's like game changing like punk, but I mean indie rock. I mean, that goes way back too, right? I mean, that's like, you could look at power pop from like late 60s and into the 70s and, like Britpop stuff, that's going on in the late 80s and 90s. I mean, there are a lot of interesting things going on. And the nice thing is, there are clubs that, I mean, I can say from like down here in Milwaukee, like we've got X-Ray Arcade. It's walking distance from my house, and they've got, last night there was like a metal show. Then there'll be like a hip hop show. There's punk rock rummage. There's indie rock. Punk show. I mean, it's all on that level. I think there's a lot of similarities.
I would say, Andy, just to add to that, I think what kind of struck me is, and I don't know how many years or it's got to be a decade plus. I'm sure you would know more than I do, but bluegrass music and all the different genres of bluegrass that came out is pretty shocking to me, that it kind of became like a big thing. I was in Appleton, down by Tallulah Park, taking a walk, and all of a sudden there's this crazy venue. I mean, this small venue that all of a sudden there's cars that are parked there, and I'm like, what's going on like a Thursday night? And it was a touring bluegrass band. And that's great. I mean, bluegrass music's great. But I'm really surprised that there's so many genres of bluegrass, that, unless I'm making that up, I'm making something up, Andy, I don't know. But I mean, I really think that there is a lot of room for that stuff. And I think part of what people may forget a little bit, I know at times I do, is that a lot of this music was politically driven and socially driven because it wasn't acceptable. And that's what the impetus to say, no, we're going to do this. I don't care what, this guy at high school thinks that pushes you into a locker because you got Converse on, or, we're going to make this happen. So I hope that is still out there in younger people, and there is a lot of that stuff. I think it's harder to capture this again because so much more is accessible, and it's okay to be different now, and which is wonderful. That's all we really wanted, right? Was to be accepted and do your thing. But there was something special about, kind of getting your ass kicked for liking this kind of music, or wearing a certain shirt, or having a certain button on. That was scary, and it was weird, but it really made you strong, and that's what bonded you like this, like old Army buddies, and why we're all still so involved in it, because we do have that running through our DNA, I guess.
What's the end game for this? Is it going to be something that is released on DVD or to a streaming company? Have you guys looked that far ahead?
Well, right now Chris is doing a really good job trying to, work with the independent music festivals and get that out first. So that's our goal right now. Part of our Kickstarter was to get a Blu-ray or a DVD out, but I mean, obviously that's antiquated. Not that a Blu-ray disc isn't antiquated, right? But it's something you can hold and have forever, be on a shelf. It's kind of like having that book there that we'll have. It's going to be a 6-panel, open up Blu-ray with a lot of bonus features, so people can go back and relive some of the other memories, and people that weren't there can, kind of experience what it was like to be there. So that's our plan in the long run. And streaming, Chris?
Yeah, right. You said music festivals, film festivals. So.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I say music festivals?
Always had music on mind.
Yeah, no. So I submitted 2 film festivals so far. There's a Beloit International Film Fest. So we should hear back from them. I think their selection is due in the next couple of days. We are in the Door County Film Festival, which will be in February, like mid-February. Still waiting on confirmation.
It's on Valentine's Day, Andy, so you could bring your wife up there.
Love it.
Yeah, Valentine's Day, and it's in Fish Creek, I believe. The gentleman, I'm spacing his name out. I know it's Chris, but I can't think of his last name. I don't have it in front of me, but he came to the screening and was super excited about it and really wants to have it in the film fest there. So we're doing that. And then last night I submitted to the Minnesota Film Fest, which is actually like Duluth Superior. So just did that. There's a couple others coming up. There's just a ton of them out there, and there's a lot of niche ones. So, there's a lot of underground film fests throughout the U.S. and kind of doing things more locally, but kind of open to like anything that sounds like it might be a good fit. So there's a Wisconsin Film Fest that's in Madison. That's pretty large. I'm down here in Milwaukee, so kind of a goal for me is to get into the Milwaukee Film Fest. It's a pretty large fest that runs like 10 days at some really classic theaters, like the Oriental and the Downer in east side of Milwaukee. So yeah, trying to get into that, and then just like a few odds and ends. There's one in Eau Claire, Midwest Weird. We'll submit to that. There's a Chicago Underground Film Fest. Yeah, so that's kind of try to do that and see what happens. And then, as Jim mentioned, like a Blu-ray, again, that's kind of crazy because now everything's streamed, but we would have a physical copy with also like a digital download. So, if you just want to use the physical copy for a coaster, you do that, but have the download. And then as far as like actual streaming, I know that quite a few of these punk rock films do go up on different platforms. Like Tubi's got quite a few of them. And I know it's a free service, but we would like to try to get on something like that just so you can, have more people see it, because that's kind of the point of this was, just to make it available to an audience. So, and show what Green Bay had. And, Green Bay is just kind of quirky and weird, and it's Midwest, and it's self-deprecating humor and not taking yourselves too seriously. That's another theme I guess would run through this. You just try to do what you could do, hope for the best, and if not, you could laugh about it, right? So
have you guys talked about doing anything with Gold? That's another documentary from Green Bay that recently came out.
Yeah, they reached out to us like right away, and we're talking with them. Right now it's kind of, we would like to do the project together, and just trying to work on some of the details. And they reached out to us and kind of put it out there as to do something like, it would be more for like a, what are we calling it, Jim? It's kind of like it's a fundraiser.
It's a fundraiser benefit, and we're going to do it for one of the, like a local charity that really needs to be, and it might be domestic violence related or something of that nature. And we've talked to, Paige and those guys have some ideas, and we've really been collaborating, and Chris and I we have some meetings coming up with them, so we will be doing something with them. And I got a chance to I went to the Waiawega International Film Fest, not Music Fest. But it would be cool if they had a music fest in Waiawega. That'd be pretty awesome too. But I got it. That was my first exposure to the film, and I thought it was great. So
I haven't seen it yet. It was in Chicago last Sunday, but it's Sunday and it's tough when you've got a busy work week coming up. So I haven't seen it yet, but I've only heard good things about it, and it would be a good sort of tag team opportunity for the two to do a double feature and, have a tie-in with like some local organizations that could use some support. So, we would be able to donate money to the cause.
What's been the most rewarding thing about this documentary so far for each of you?
Well, for me, it was just, I made a comment to somebody the other day that, we showed it 4 times over that weekend. Friday obviously was, the initial showing, and then we had Saturday night and Saturday matinee, and then we had a Sunday matinee. And again, there was a lot of nerves going into that first one. And then as time went by, you sort of can relax and enjoy it and take it in. And that last showing on Sunday afternoon, my wife and I were sitting on a couch off to the side, and I had a beer and a bag of popcorn, and I had watched it pretty much almost every time that we showed it. And I mean, I kind of was in and out at times, but I just sat there and watched everybody take it in, and the laughter and the clapping and the cheers at the end just made it super worthwhile. I actually videotaped it on my phone. Videotape, that's an old acronym right there, anachronism. But yeah, I just did a little video, and it was just nice. I really, Dan Dillon giving me a bear hug with tears in his eyes when he saw it the first time. Dan was a singer for the Miners, one of those early bands. So, I mean, it was right there that kind of just makes everything worthwhile, right?
I guess for me, similar. I mean, it was great to see people's reaction. And, I always talked about having a little kiddie pool with jarts out in the audience that they could whip at Chris and I for not getting it done in a timely manner. But the fact that we stuck with it, and we had some people that really, really backed us on it. And one of those was Ed Guerrero from the Tyrants, who's a good, has become a pretty good friend of mine. And he said, "You guys take your time, do it right. I know people are waiting for this, but you've done it. You've waited this long. Make sure it's good. Make sure that, that this is how you want it." And so he's really backed us on it, and just a lot of different people. And for me, I guess the most, thing that really touched home for me was just to keep this thing going. I mean, that it was such a small thing that these guys started in, late 70s, and that's still going. And like you said, Andy, the first show you went to was a show that was set up by the guys that were around from that beginning part or close to it. So just to be able to show that it, there wasn't 1,000 people at a show. That was packed that night at Kutzkus Hall when that floor got ruined. But that it started out as a small thing that was we had no idea where it's going to go. And then we captured it all by making a film that just gives people a little bit of insight into it. That's probably my favorite thing, is that we came to fruition and it was completed.
Are people like asking for you to do more? Like now you whet their appetite, is there been any talk about releasing a soundtrack to the album, or any kind of like vinyl record or a CD?
So we've talked about that along the whole 10 years. And there's this guy in Green Bay, his name's Corey McCullough, who's one of the Green Bay punk rock historians pretty much. And he's a good friend of ours, and he would like to do something along those lines. And then we've talked to, some of the bands, but we would like to do a green and gold vinyl, Andy, of some sort, and have a gatefold.
Love it.
Ipso facto, like Norm would say. Yes, let's have a gatefold. If we're going to do it, let's have a gatefold. Yes. But
some friends of ours have been hitting us up for like doing a photo book, and so I don't know. We haven't really talked out details, but I would definitely be interested in that. I think it'd be nice to. We've got some really great images, so to put those on paper and maybe get that out to folks that would be interested, that's an option as well.
So that's kind of in the works. We have a bunch of stuff in the works, Andy, and other film related stuff that we probably you don't want to announce it and then have it not come out till 10 years later, Andy. So now that we know all this, but we do have some other projects that we'll be announcing at some point. Yeah. Some really interesting stuff. The support for this has been phenomenal, and I can't be any happier. And the reality is people really kind of came to the table with us and really made this special for us, because it could have went a million ways sideways when you're doing such a big project and then you're having bands play. Everybody came together, and it was really a special thing, and we're very fortunate. And it's because of the people and the support we had. That's what made it important, from the editors to Tarl and Kylie at the Tarleton and their workers, to Bill at Hinterland for making a cool beer for us, and Mark Patel at Luna for making a coffee and doing some interesting stuff, getting Brian Walsby to do some art for a Kutzka's t-shirt. I mean, we really had, and then the people that came to the film and supported punk rock throughout all these years, that's, you know, it really is a big family of craziness, you know.
Well, where can people go to find out more about the film? They can go see it next week at the Tarleton for the 2:00 showing, but where can people go to find out just some basic information about the film?
I would say we've got the website. It's greenblahfilm.com.
Our Facebook, we have
those need some updating. There's some, I need to add some more photos and music on there and some video, but so there's that. And then we've got merch for sale on there as well, but then the Facebook page, and we're on Instagram as well.
I want to thank you for doing the show today. And again, thank you for making such an incredible film. I think it's good for the community to have something like this to go back and see the history. And like I said, you laid it out so beautifully. If people get a chance to see the film at a premiere, go see it definitely, or go follow the pages so that you can see when it's released in some other format. Any parting words?
Well, I just want to say thank you for having, you're part of this whole thing too. I mean, we are in Code Zero Radio. What does it say? New rock, new radio. What are the call letters, Andy?
WCZR.
WCZR, sweet sounds from Code Zero Radio. Just you doing this is awesome. And all the people that are playing in bands and still doing that. And, I selectively go see music. I sat through a lot of music and played in a lot of bands. So, and I have other things going on in my life too. So people are still doing awesome stuff. Like Chris mentioned, Tom and Pierre at the UFO Museum are doing, a show. I think they have a show there this weekend. So check that out. There's just a lot of different things happening in Green Bay and the Fox Valley. And the reality is that it's called Green Blah because that's what we called Green Bay, because there wasn't much going on, right? But that encompassed Appleton too. A lot of our friends like Jeff DeGooey and those guys from Moral Disgust, Oshkosh Band, Pete and Carm and Jeff from the Mess Appleton Band. There's so many different awesome bands that came out of the Fox Valley and just continues to just be this thing that just keeps running. So thanks for having your thing.
Yeah, thanks for having us on. Thanks for your wonderful feedback on the film. Much appreciated. Are we going to see you at the next weekend?
You might. It's a busy season.
That's Andy, there's no might. There's no try or might. Like, try to make a film or try to have a radio show. You either do it or don't, Andy. It's kind of you're not going. So he's saying go to see it, but Andy might not be there.
You know what? I'll be there.
There you go.
All right, go check.
It'd be great. Yeah, it'd be great to see you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for all the support that Green Blah has been given and will be given. We really appreciate everybody, and we're very fortunate to be able to do what we do.